This nibble originally aired on RSBANDB Update, episode 916. RuneScape Endgame is everything. Enjoy. You know, people get 99s, 120s, 200 mils and such, and then they look at the achievement list and so on and so forth. They gathered their lore books, and that led to, in players that have been part of our communities, setting up their own challenges, whether they would be PVM or otherwise. And this was all happening before the means existed to actually recognize this in game. So in some ways, that was the players curating their own content without having the official underpinnings for that. And that led us to something that was an interesting idea, and where I think we can go next with this is, to what extent were the updates that we've had that recognize achievements, that recognize those paths towards endgame, unplanned versus being purposely fleshed out at the later stage of the game? And we're talking about things like comp, trim, master quest, master max now, those sorts of things.
You could go all the way back to the original skill capes as well, couldn't you? With
True,
the same question.
Yeah.
So I wasn't involved in the development of most of those things, but as far as I'm aware, they were largely added from the point of view of retroactively recognizing existing player achievements. I mean, that's true as recent as the current Master Max cape. That's essentially like, as the number of people that are already eligible for that cape rises, it makes it clear how much more attainable that goal is, and therefore makes it sane as a goal. I guess that it's an interesting distinction you draw that, like, I think RuneScape is unusual in that regard of having a very self-directed player base. That's unusual within the genre as well, that a lot of games have. They set your objectives for you. They give you goals to aim for, or achievements, something like that. And it's unusual to see players do more than that. Often the goal is extremely, you think about a trim comp as a sort of objective. That's a pretty extreme objective. Yeah. So often the objective is pretty extreme, but largely I'm not aware anywhere else within the MMO space of players doing the equivalent of 200 million all.
And that was my next question.
That isn't really a concept that exists in other MMOs, as far as I know.
Yeah, and you might have like content creators or like a very niche group of people doing it, but it's pretty
there's your equivalent
mainstream.
of settled, right? But for the most part, there's not much that's so Guild Wars 1 has this God walking among the immortals, which I think is just trim comp essentially. It's just do everything once. Like tick off absolutely everything, and as far as I know, there isn't really a step beyond that, if that makes sense. Whereas we have our true trim and our my point is, yes, I think the RuneScape community has always been, as you pointed out, like very, very create goals, share those goals socially. Create aspirational things for other players.
Yeah,
and
I call that enterprising.
Our history is and our history has essentially just been retroactively recognizing. There are some, say with Iron Man, where we can't really retroactively recognize because the technical setup doesn't make sense to retroactively recognize that. So, but we were still retroactively creating a mode that players had already been doing themselves and just kind of formalizing it.
And in many ways, this leads to the entire RuneScape endgame perspective, is that World of Warcraft, ESO, Star Trek Online, every other MMO is designed to funnel people towards that endgame, whereas here in RuneScape, we have 28 skills right now, soon to be 29, and back in the day when we had 20 skills, people were still doing the same thing. Granted, it was a different game and such. It just really raises the question and requires a bit more hollowing out of, what is the strategy that a content developer, content designer takes for shaping the path that players will take to those goals and beyond that.
Well, so this has come up actually. So I said I hadn't been thinking about this, but this has actually been coming up internally in design discussions a little bit, because I've been one of the things I've been banging on about as a design principle is thinking about. We have to think about how the content looks on launch, but also how the content looks in 1 year's time, in 5 years' time. Yeah. And an interesting irony of RuneScape content is that, broadly speaking, all RuneScape content is endgame content. Because all RuneScape content, with a small number of exceptions, or it's specifically designed as like a novice quest or an onboarding point or something, is designed with our currently engaged. Something like half of our active playing players are maxed, highly engaged players who are looking for something to do. They want new. I suppose time sinks is probably the clearest way to put it. Like, I don't mean the time sink should be cynical, but they want something which is going to take a bit of time to do. They don't want something which just takes an hour and then they're done with it.